This episode is presented by Squarespace. More on that later.
Today I'm going to be in this huge warehouse that's filled with literally tens of thousands of dollars worth of tools, but I'm only going to be using a circular saw, a drill, a sander, a jig saw, and a brad nailer to build this coffee table. Now, I truly believe that this is a project that anybody can build regardless of skill level, but that doesn't mean that it's easy or that you're going to knock it out in a couple hours. It's going to take some technique and some time and some patience, and I can help you with one of those three things, so let's get to it.
Before I get started, if you're newish to woodworking or looking to get deeper into woodworking, do me a favor and go check out the Craig Academy. There's way too much for me to list it all here, but I would describe it as an online course or set of courses designed to give people the foundational skills, knowledge, and confidence to either start or progress in their building journeys. And I can personally vouch for it because I helped them put the whole thing together. I personally led the instruction for 3 projects: a workbench, a shoe bench, and a coffee table. And my friend Shara from Woodshop Diaries led instruction on an outdoor planner, a floating shelf with storage, and a bookshelf. Now, in addition to these project builds, you're also going to get access to a skills library with 10 learning tracks, and I could go on, but just do me a favor, and if you're either early on in your journey or, again, looking to get into woodworking, go check it out and tell them I sent you. All right, so before I actually started building anything, the first thing that I had to do was verify that the difference in height between the 12-inch legs and the 16-inch legs was actually 4 inches. So I just clamped them to a table upside down and then measured the difference, and it was actually dead on. I think here it looks like it's a little different, but that's just how I'm holding the ruler. And the point of doing this was that I designed it so that the bottom of the 2 tiers on the table are 4 inches different in height. So if these had been significantly off, I would have had to tweak my design a little bit before I printed out my template papers. So since nothing was significantly different, I could go ahead and print everything up. And then here I'm just using something with a straight edge, a ruler, to go ahead and trim everything to its finished size. So obviously doing this is a lot more tedious than it would be if you were using something like a CNC router to cut everything out. Under normal circumstances, that's definitely the way that I would build a piece like this, but I want to do it very DIY with some limited tools, so just paper and MDF and some rasps, and it might not be quite as nice as the CNC'd version, but these shapes are pretty arbitrary for the most part, other than that 4-inch height difference, so I'm sure it'll be fun. So with my pages stuck down to my MDF, I could start cutting my template shape out, and probably the easiest way to do this would be with a track saw, but since we're not using a track saw, we're going to use a circular saw. I'm going to go ahead and do that. So this will be a little bit different for everybody because it's based off of the size of the base plate on your circular saw and the distance from the edge to the blade. But basically I'm just making sure that what I'm using as my straight edge guide is spaced the proper distance away from the edge that I want to cut so that I end up cutting right on the outside of that edge of my printout. And basically I'm just going to work my way around the template doing this, and you'll be able to do all of the areas that are straight with another setup just like I'm using here, where you're just clamping a straight edge guide parallel to the line that you want to cut. And then for anything that's curved, I'm just going to use a jig saw. So with the jig saw, I'm not really trying to get everything perfect. I want to stay pretty proud of the line, and I'm just trying to remove the bulk of the material. That's why you can see here I'm just kind of nibbling away at it, definitely not trying to smooth out an arc. And then to actually refine the shape, I'll use a mixture of sanders, hand sanding, and rasps. And I guess the important thing to remember here is that it doesn't need to be perfect. The line is really just a guideline, I guess. And really all that matters is that it looks good. So you want to just try to give yourself the nice, smoothest, even arcs that you're able to make. So here I'm starting to lay my template shape out onto the actual 3/4 inch plywood that we're going to be making the coffee table out of. And if you were starting a brand new sheet of plywood, you could definitely get this whole table out of less than a full sheet of plywood. That said, I'm using some scraps that I had laying around, so I found a few offcuts that were big enough for me to yield a few pieces, and then I had to dig into a good chunk of a full sheet. But anyway, the most efficient way to lay them out is like you can see here where the long piece of one is intersecting the middle of the last piece, kind of doing a dirty number position, for lack of a better word. But anyway, then I'm going to go ahead and use my jigsaw to just rough it out, again staying plenty proud of the line, and we'll cut everything to the line using the template that we made along with a router. And this part's going to become very repetitive, so rather than going through everything and talking about it, I'm going to go through one layer in detail, and then you would basically just have to repeat this exact thing 12 more times. So after we have our first layer cut out, I'm going to go ahead and attach my template to it with some double-sided tape, making sure that it's stuck down nice and tight. Then I'm going to use my palm router with a templating bit in it to cut a few layers down. So I'm going to do one pass all the way around the entirety of the piece, and then I'm going to lower my bit a little bit more and take another pass. And once you've cut deep enough that you have a ledge there that your bearing can reference for the next passes that you're going to take, you really don't need the template anymore. So at that point, I'm going to go ahead and remove it. And you want to be careful doing this since you're going to need to use this template 12 more times. And since it's made out of 1/4 inch MDF, there's a chance that you could snap it if you're just trying to pry it off really aggressively. That said, if you did, you could technically use one of the layers that you've already finished as your template moving forward. So not the end of the world if you did. But in any case, with the template removed, I'm going to continue using the same bit to route down a few more layers. And you can really keep doing this all the way until you're almost through the whole thing. Like you can see in this shot, I have this little ledge left over. That's the last little bit of material that I need to remove. And to cut that last little bit off, we're going to switch from a templating bit to a flush trim bit. So the bearing's at the tip of the bit rather than the base of it. And then with the piece flipped upside down, we can again work our way around the entire perimeter to remove the last bit of material. And you could technically switch to this once you had established that first edge. But once you do switch to cutting this way, you're going to have to remove the rest of your material in one pass. That's why I like to wait until I just have a tiny little bit left to do it. I don't want to take too aggressive of a cut, especially with a bit this small. Okay, so like I said, now we're going to have to do that 12 more times because we need 13 layers just like this. So the only thing that I'll add in is that the way that I actually did it in reality and the most efficient way to do it is to kind of do things in stages rather than by piece. So don't fully complete one piece and then move on to the next one and fully complete it 13 times over. That'd be kind of wasteful because you're going to be changing out bits and all that stuff. So instead, what I do is put the template on, establish that ledge, then put the template on the second piece, establish the ledge, the third piece, establish the ledge, and so on. Then after I've done that to all 13 pieces, route the rest of the way down on all 13, then switch out the bit and remove the last little piece of material on all 13. It's just a little more efficient that way. But in any case, with all of that finally over, which took a lot longer in real life than it did for me to talk about here, I could move on to making all of the little blocks that are going to go between each piece so that it creates the gap, and we're able to make this whole coffee table a lot wider than just 13 layers of plywood would be. So here there's going to be a 6-inch by 1.5 inch strip, and then 4 3-inch by 1.5 inch strips on each layer. And there's going to be a total of 12 layers, so we're going to need 12 of the 6-inch pieces and 48 of the 3-inch pieces. And this is something that would be way faster to do on a table saw than with a circular saw like I'm gonna. So if you're making this and you have access to one, definitely do that, but I'm not gonna do it. I'm gonna use the circular saw. But to help speed it up a little bit for me, I'm gonna take a speed square and set the distance so that I can strike a line that's exactly where my straight edge needs to go in order for me to be able to rip out some strips that are 1.5 inches thick. So after I strike a line, I can just clamp my straight edge to it and then go ahead and rip, and I'll end up with a strip that's exactly as wide as I need it. And honestly, I didn't even bother doing the math to figure out exactly how many strips I need. I just kind of roughed it in my head and then just ripped out a few extra strips. That way I knew I'd be covered and I wouldn't have to go back to doing this again. Then to cut everything into 6-inch lengths and 3-inch lengths, I used, again, that same speed square to just quickly mark a line. And then I used a speed square to actually cut it again with my circular saw. And I just realized that I was saying speed square for the T-square before. So T-square to measure, speed square to cut. Some of you probably already commented on that. That's fine. I'll take the engagement. Okay, I know I said that I was not going to use a table saw on this project, but I guess I lied because here I'm using the fence of my table saw just to position all my 6-inch blocks up against it so I knew that they were the same starting point. And then I marked a line going right down the center. And I'm going to mark another line on the center of the top of each of my long pieces. That way I can make sure that I center these things right at the middle of the piece and that they're all in alignment going through as I start building up the layers. So to put everything together, I'm just going to be using some glue and some brad nails. And for all the blocks on the end, I'm just going to line them up so that they're barely overhanging the longest point that they need to cover within the template. So for example, on that top edge there that's to the right of your screen, I need to make sure that the block is barely proud of that curved arc. And then, like I said, I'm just going to use glue and brad nails and some clamps to work my way up, gluing on layer after layer after layer until 12 of them were complete. But then for the last one, I obviously didn't want to use nails since you'd be able to see them. So instead, to attach that last long strip, I just used glue and clamps. So at this point, everything is together, but obviously the piece is still very rough. And as you can see, the big problem that we have here is now we have all these chunky block corners that are extending past our slats. And I used a few different methods to remove these, but at the end of the day, the final removal just came down to some aggressive sanding. And I was worried that this part was going to be slower and harder than it was. I mean, it still did take quite a bit of time, but it wasn't that bad. And because you have half of the surfaces exactly where they should be, they kind of act as a template to help you perfectly smooth all of the little blocks. I was worried that I was going to have to use a lot more hand coordination, like I was like power carving a seed dish or something, but it wasn't like that at all. You could really just kind of follow the curve, and as you got close to it, your sander naturally wants to reference that, and everything comes out pretty easy to get a nice smooth curve. So for the blocks that were on the side of the piece where it wraps around to the bottom, there were some really big chunks that were sticking proud of the piece, and I did not want to have to sand all these, so I just got my jig saw again and tilted the base to 30 degrees, which is the angle that those were, and then cut off the majority of them that way, and then again used some aggressive sanding to get everything flush and refined. And you want to be pretty careful with this. You can see here that unfortunately, I was not. Hey there. If you're like me, then the only thing you like building more than coffee tables is building websites. Actually, I prefer building coffee tables. And thankfully, Squarespace makes it really easy. I've been using Squarespace for about 4 years now, and it's been great. Prior to that, I used to code everything on my own, which is fine if you like doing that. But honestly, it's hard, takes time, and the outcome wasn't as nice as it is now with the templates that I use with Squarespace. Not as nice, that's being polite. They sucked. Now, in addition to Squarespace making it super easy to build and maintain your site, buy domains, and all that stuff, they also have plenty of e-commerce, which has been really helpful since we started selling plans. Things like inventory management, a simple and secure checkout process, and unlimited products allows us to easily manage online transactions. So if you're thinking about starting a website, or even if you already have one that you think could be better, you owe it to yourself to check out Squarespace to see if it might be a better option for you. Just head over to squarespace.com/4eyes for a free trial, and then when you're ready to launch, use the offer code 4eyes to save 10% off of your first purchase of a website or domain. Again, that's squarespace.com/4eyes. Hey, could you cool it on the whispering? I'm trying to record an ad read. Sorry. All right, thanks Squarespace. Now let's get back to the build. So to fix that, I found one of the, I don't know how many dirty number little scrap pieces that I had sitting on the ground, and then I just found the biggest one that I could and glued it back in where I'd accidentally cut it out. And it's a little bit noticeable if you know to look at it, but I would say it pretty much fixed the problem. Definitely good enough for this type of piece. So the next thing that I wanted to do was cut a little edge profile in between all of the slats. And I guess there were two main reasons for doing this. Part of it was to just make the piece feel nicer, but also because plywood tends to want to splinter a little bit. if you leave the edges really sharp and crisp. So I figured it would be better to just kind of knock them back a little bit. And I couldn't decide between using a round over bit or a chamfer bit. So in order to help me decide, I just went ahead and cut both of them in. So here I have the whole piece flipped upside down and I'm cutting on one of the middle slats. So this will be pretty inconspicuous and nobody's ever really going to see it unless you flip the whole thing upside down. And after doing it, I decided that I liked the way that the chamfer looked better. So that's what I'm going to go with. So as you've probably noticed by now with this project, like nothing's really hard. It's just a very tedious project. You're going to spend a lot of time doing a few steps over and over, whether that's template routing or jigsawing out pieces, whatever. There's only like 5 steps to the whole piece. It's just they take a long time because you have to keep repeating them. And it's possible that the single place that I spent the most time was sanding. Like this is a very sanding heavy project. So definitely have some good music or podcasts or something to listen to and just do your best to keep yourself entertained. Maybe get in a couple squats, try to work out the biceps a little bit, just work up a sweat. And by the way, to the commenter who about a month ago asked me if I could even bench press 135 pounds, I'll say maybe. So here I'm just going along the piece and cutting that chamfer in between every slat. And I know in fast motion it doesn't look like it took that much time, but if you're really paying attention, you can actually see the sun moving across the back wall there. So that kind of tells you how much time I was spending doing this. And then after I'd cut the chamfer in between each slat, I went ahead and just knocked back any little fuzzies with some sandpaper. So at this point I put the router down, even though I still want to cut a chamfer along the front and back edges of the piece. But I also want to have a nice crisp front edge while I put the legs on, or at least while I'm positioning them. So I went ahead and got them exactly where I wanted, and then I just pre-drilled a couple holes and kind of marked on the bottom where the slots in the underside of the leg would be. That way, after I have everything finished, I can attach them again, no problem. So once the legs were on and they were looking good, I went ahead and took them off, and then I could put that chamfer along the front and back edge that I wanted to do. All right, so we threw some water-based polyurethane on this guy, reattached the legs, and we're done. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that this is the nicest thing I've ever built, but I think for a DIY project with a limited set of tools, it's pretty unique and will definitely grab people's attention. And for as much of a pain in the butt that it is for me to ignore all of my big fancy machinery and limit myself to a more humble stable of tools, I think it's good to do at least a few times a year. It can remind us of where we came from and I guess help us to be more appreciative of where we are now. And speaking of appreciation, special thanks to all of my Patreon members for helping me to make these videos possible. I know I say it in every video, but I genuinely mean it, so thank you. And if you like the show and want to show your support, get a 4 Eyes t-shirt and even discounts on our woodworking plans, click the link in the description and see if it's right for you. And as always, no pressure. All right, well, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.